Hi, everyone, and welcome to TheGrill Day 3. We already had a great morning panel on gaming. I'm Sean Birch, our tech reporter here at TheWrap, and we have an exciting afternoon program lined up that's all about innovation and disruption. First, we're going to hear about the power of podcasts, followed by a one-on-one conversation with The Social Dilemma writer-director Jeff Orlowski at 2 p.m. Pacific. Afterwards, there will be a presentation by of Priv by the privacy company co-founder and CEO Craig Danieloff. We will finish up at 5:30 p.m. with the Powerhouse Roundtable with TheWrap's 2020 innovators. Now, without further ado, it's time for me to introduce The Power of Podcasts, What You Need to Know, presented by Audible. Let's bring out our panelists. First, we have Rachel Giazza, who joined Audible in 2019 as SVP for Content Acquisition and Development. She later became Executive Vice President, Head of US Content this year. And prior to Audible, Rachel was at Spotify, where she held a variety of roles, including leading the Global Content Experiences team, and was a key contributor to Spotify's global growth and success. Thanks for coming, Rachel. Next, we have Michael Bosstick, who is the CEO and co-founder of Dear Media Podcast Network. With close to 40 shows under management, Dear Media is the first and leading podcast network focused on female voices, audiences, and narratives. Michael and his wife, Lauren, also co-host The Skinny Confidential, him and her podcast, which recently hit 70 million unique downloads. Thanks, Michael, for being here. Next, we have Dom Roberts. As a creative and activist, Dom Roberts has captured the attention of stars like Reese Witherspoon and Sophia Bush, among others. Her new podcast series, The Uncomfortable Podcast with Dom Roberts, is focused on elevating Black voices and centered around uncomfortable conversations, including the racism and injustice that they experience on a daily basis. Dom, good to have you. And last but not least, we have Jess Wolfe, who is the CEO of Rebel Girls, the female-led global company behind the New York Times bestselling book series, Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, an award-winning podcast by the same name. Season 4 of the podcast launched earlier this month, tapping into Hollywood to tell the stories of remarkable immigrant women from Frida Pinto to Lorraine Powell-Jobs. All right, let's jump into it, everyone. So I'm going to first kick it off from a bit of a high-level standpoint. We are talking about the power of podcasts after all, and I simply just want to get into what makes this such a great medium, because we recently passed 100 million people in the US who are listening to podcasts at least once a month. So I'll just throw it to you, Rachel, to start off. What makes this a great medium for telling stories, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, the way we think about audio, effectively, it's pretty much the oldest entertainment medium. People have been telling stories for centuries, and now we're able to do that utilizing technology. For me, when I listen to audio, it's really that personal, immersive experience. It can take you on a journey. It can take you on an adventure. You can learn something. You can grow. It's all about having that there right with you. And there's something really personal. You're listening to something. It's like having somebody in your ear right there with you through the whole journey.
Don, what about you? You have an eclectic background, but you've jumped into podcasting, and it seems to be going great so far. Why do you think it's been working so well for you?
I think what's really great about the power of podcasting is just how it can be used also as a resource. I think kind of how my podcast got started was we were looking for a way to expand the conversation. And I think, like Rachel's saying, it's an immersive experience. The listeners are able to hear in, and it also breaks down walls. I think you're able to have harder conversations through the medium of podcasting because you have an individual's attention.
Michael and Jess, I'd love to hear from you as well. All right, Michael, we almost lost you there, but I'll throw it to you.
In my personal experience, we've been in the digital space for a long time, my wife Lauren and I, and we have never found a channel as impactful as podcasting. As a matter of fact, Dom was just on our show, and we obviously at Dear Media Producer Show, and we had a really good conversation about a lot of topics that I think mainstream media is either too uncomfortable or incapable to have. And like, you know, the power of this medium, I think, is getting people to come together and understand, hear from people's different people's perspectives in a more enlightening way. And I think, you know, getting away from the quick sound bites that we see in traditional media and actually having deep conversations, whether people agree or disagree, but at least getting to a place where we can, you know, start to empathize and understand. I think that's where this medium is so impactful, and I think it's where the world's going, and hope where I hope people will meet each other, because you know, it's been a very divisive year, as we're all aware of, and I think it would be less divisive if people were more willing to understand different people's perspectives, backgrounds, and how they came to their opinions, and this medium definitely does that.
Sure. And Jess, why has it been such a great medium for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to the kids and family podcast space, which is where we specialize in. And if you think about audio stories and audiobooks, they've been very, very popular with young listeners. But podcasts now are a way to give free, snackable content always being developed in this space for kids. And we just see that there's such a huge potential to have more content geared towards young listeners, and especially towards young girls. It's just a wide open market right now. And the accessibility of podcasts allows for everyone to participate.
You're right, it is a wide open market right now, but we're really seeing people dive in with both feet, it seems like, this year especially. And Rachel, I know over at Audible, you guys have really leaned into exclusive podcasts recently. Can I maybe have you speak to just what kind of content are you seeing that resonates with Audible's audience? What are you really looking for as someone that's running content over there? And then I'd love to, after hearing from you, just hear from everyone else, what really works on your end for your company or for your podcast in your case, Doug?
Yeah, you know, we really focus on the power of the story. So for us, it's all about bringing stories to life from people who are telling stories that really need to be heard. You know, we have this saying that we celebrate the stories across the human spectrum, and that's something that's near and dear to us. So the only thing that we have that's consistent, because we work with so many different types of creators, we're working with playwrights, we're working with Hollywood, we're working with writers, we're working with musicians. The one thing they all have in common is that they're really telling a story and telling a powerful story. And that's really consistent with kind of our brand. You know, a lot of people think of us as an audiobook company, but the truth is we've been in the business of audio storytelling. And that's kind of our sweet spot. And that's the thing that we hope defines the listener experience.
Jess or Michael, do you have anything to weigh in on that front as well, simply when it comes to what type of content are you aiming for right now?
Yeah. On our side of things, our content is very edutainment. So we're very, entertainment focused in terms of the sound and the music, and it's fun and it's upbeat and uplifting. But all of our stories are nonfiction. We tell stories about amazing, remarkable women and their lives and who they were as girls and what they achieved. And so the educational element in this very entertaining way is our sweet spot. And we're also seeing podcasts really be a mechanism of emerging learning tools, especially in this kind of virtual environment where many, many classrooms now are using our podcasts and our stories to supplement their curriculums, and parents are using our podcast to supplement kind of learning in the virtual world. So that edutainment space is really where we're focusing.
Gotcha. And Dom, I might as well ask you as well. I mean, you're hosting your own podcast. How are you going about finding, something that's going to really work for your audience? How do you decide what you want to talk about? Obviously, there's no shortage of stories out there right now, but just
Yeah. So my focus is mainly based off of just the content that I'll be creating off of my Instagram. If there is a social issue that I think the conversation needs to be expanded in, for example, when I was just visiting on the Skinny Confidential and having a great conversation about cancel culture and things of the sort, I think it's opportunities and conversations like that where people want to get a different perspective, and it really helps to hear, and it kind of breaks down walls when you're hearing from other people that might need to hear something like that. So it's been a really interesting journey, and getting feedback from people being like, thank you so much for speaking on that. I'm not hearing a lot of that. So kind of finding that spot where, you know, the conversations that go untouched is where I kind of aim for. And the uncomfortable, hard things is kind of the things that I want to speak on.
And then lastly, Michael, so you have a podcast slate of about 40 shows now. What have you seen that's working for you guys over there at Dear Media? What type of shows in particular?
Sure. Well, I think it all comes down to the creator. Like what we try to do over here is really point out that these creators are multifaceted and have multiple channels at their exposure. But this is a real medium to provide depth. I think for the last 10 years in the digital space, it's been all about how things look and how things feel. And I think what's happened is as these creators have built their audience, people have wanted more. They've wanted to know how they really feel, how they really think, you know, and I think this medium helps provide that. So when we think about bringing on shows for the network, we think, okay, what is a unique conversation or perspective that could be beneficial for our audience to hear? And does this have an impact in moving society forward, whether that's providing comedic relief or doing what Dom's doing and, you know, really highlighting active issues that should be highlighted. Also, if it's providing a little bit of relief, there's obviously been a lot of pain this year for a lot of people. So if we can be a place to entertain, inspire, educate people and help them get through the day, we're also very focused on that. And I really just believe in the power of the audio medium. And it's like, you know, this is human beings, one of our oldest forms of communication. And I think, like I said earlier, if people can really come together and hear people and not just look at people at face value and really hear how they came to their thoughts and conclusions, I think it'll move the world into a better place, a more understanding and empathetic place.
And so when I first heard that I was going to host this panel, you know, the first question that popped in my mind was, and I wanted to ask everyone here how the pandemic has been affecting it, because we obviously at TheWrap have been reporting on how it's impacting the movie business, for instance. And when it comes to podcasts, I could see it going both ways. On the one hand, maybe you're not listening quite as much in your car because you're not commuting. On the other hand, you might be having, you know, more free time at home to listen to podcasts. I think that's probably what it's been for me. So I'd like to open up to anyone that just wants to weigh in there and fill me in on what have you noticed during the pandemic?
Sure. Maybe I could talk about it from the network perspective for a second. I think in the beginning, and I'm sure the other panelists would agree, you know, everyone was kind of trying to figure out what was happening. You know, we didn't know how severe this was going to be. We didn't know what was going to happen, where there was a lot of fear in the space. You know, and there was a lot of data coming out in the beginning saying, hey, the loss of commute is going to hurt this medium. But what I've really been seeing on my end is that this is, and if you're looking at your media and podcast, maybe audio in an isolated frame view, not taking into account everything else, like we've actually seen a boost in this medium. There's a lot of new listeners jumping in that were maybe leaving traditional radio or satellite. There's a lot of people discovering these shows and they're on demand. They're listening at home. The commute really hasn't impacted us that much at all. I mean, we're up about 35% of Dear Media, and also revenue's grown. I think speaking to other mediums, this is a very fast medium to change brand messaging and get brand partners. You know, we're not limited to the same limitations that movie production or music production or live events are limited to. And so if you're looking at it, what's happening to audio in an isolated view, not taking into account all the other terrible things, like it's actually in a way been not a bad thing for audio, in my opinion.
Yeah, you know, we've seen similar, you know, changes maybe in occasions and use cases for listening. So obviously with the commute going away, that goes away. But I think to the point of kids and family, we've seen a lot of pop in kids and family listening. You know, it's a way to disconnect. It's a way to be together as a family. It's a way to consume something new. And so we've seen just the use cases a change. And then we've also seen, you know, spikes in people who are either wanting to become more informed. So we've seen a lot of pick up in content that's really informative about the world and what's going on in the world. And then we've also seen, you know, a bit more escapism, some thriller, sci-fi pop as well. So again, we've just seen people adapt and transform as the world has changed. We've also seen a lot of intake from creators who, you know, maybe had a project or have had something that they've been sitting on with not a right time to work on it, having that space or that moment to tell that story or to create that work and it's given some air cover for that. So agree, it's a really hard time, but there have been some silver linings in terms of people adapting and using the format to move forward and do things that they weren't, time didn't allow or life didn't allow before.
Yeah, I would echo that. Kids and family, I think, as a genre, has probably seen about a 9 or 10% increase in listenership since COVID started. Our own podcast, it has doubled since COVID started. And so while our use case has changed, it used to be the thing you listen to in the car with the parents driving the kids to school, back home again. It's now a screen-free alternative at home. And so when you don't want your kids to be watching all the time, this is, let's put on a story, let's put on a podcast. And then, as I mentioned, this educational element to it, and having this be a supplement to a child's education when it's virtual, we've seen that's been helping, listenership significantly.
Yeah, I totally agree. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, how has it impacted you as a host?
I think for what I've noticed is it's been a heightened engagement for sure. I think a lot of people are leaning in, especially since I work in the realm of activism. I mean, as we all know, just with the news and outlets and everything's happening, people are looking for ways to actively be involved, but more so looking for resources. I think it's incredible. I'm sure, Rachel, you've even noticed with Audible, the amount of books and audio books that people are ordering and trying to get a hold of just to become more educated. And same with the podcast as a resource. I think so many people are leaning in with a heightened engagement for, perspective and an educational purpose. And I think despite all, the bad that's happened with just how much the world has changed, I think this is one of the positive things that people are actually starting to lean in, learn, and try and understand.
And I also wanted to ask everyone here simply, what's the secret sauce, for lack of a better term, when it comes to creating compelling content? Because I know on my end, I listen to plenty of podcasts, and there's just such a wide variety. It could be 20 minutes long, it could be a couple hours long, it could be funny, it can be a very serious podcast. Is there anything there that is a linchpin for every show, or is it simply on a show-by-show basis?
Sure, I'll start with that one. Our secret sauce, it comes down to a few things. First is the length. So we're very much into this 20-minute story episode, which is about equivalent to what a cartoon would be or a TV show would be. Gives enough time for a beginning, a middle, an end. But for kids, their attention span is limited. So that's our kind of secret sauce in terms of timing. We also make sure that we get a really, really cool narrator for each episode. And so we are really playing into this kind of dual audience, parent and child listening, historical woman plus real day role model. So, our episode on the first woman who climbed Mount Everest was narrated by the first woman who skied Mount Everest. And then we follow that up with a short interview of the narrator, so girls can understand also who she is and how she got to where she is. So that's kind of the formula that we use that we think worked really well.
I think, from my end, this is interesting because, 5 years ago or so when Lauren and I got into this space, people were saying, what the hell is a podcast? What are you doing? They didn't really understand why we would do this. And what we found quickly along the way is that this medium is much different than others. It's not about a pretty picture of an outfit or a face, or you really have to have something to say. And with that, you really, really need to put the audience first. We always say on our show, and I touched on this earlier, you got to educate, entertain, or inspire in some kind of way, but you have to do it in a way where you're always putting the audience first and putting them in a place and listen, maybe my advertisers might not like this, but honestly, I put them above my advertisers, I put them above myself, I put them above the guests. And I always joke, Lauren and I are outspoken characters, but you can bring any PR publicist in the room with us. We're still going to ask the questions that our audience wants to know. And I think it's because we recognize the power of what the audience does when they connect with a host and feel they're getting value and extrapolating value out of a show. So, when I sit down with talent like Dom on the network, I'm like, listen, This is about serving your audience. It's about speaking in an authentic voice. I know that's, cliche, and it's, people keep saying it, but it's true. And, really saying like, okay, what do the first 25 episodes look like? That's great. But taking it beyond there, how do you keep people coming back and inspired and excited about the show they're consuming? And so there's obviously a lot of different things that go into that formula, but really to me, it's, putting the audience first and catering to them and making sure they get value from whatever they're listening to.
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of those statements, that narrative arc, we see that work really well. But for me, the ultimate is the sentiment of connection. So, agreed, audience is such a major part of it. And we really see our job as connecting the right audience to the right creator and really having that ability to be, inspired or informed or educated or whatever they're there to do, just having that connection. And I also think that's kind of what drives the power of the medium, because you can do that, and it's without any of those visual cues that could change your connection. You're really focused on the words, and you're focused on the story, and you're focused on that moment that you're in, that occasion you're listening.
Yeah, I think the ability to create community for me is what I think has been amazing. I think there are a lot of people right now, and whether that's in the entertainment space, the education space of podcasting, whatever that looks like, but it's a sense of community, knowing that, and the consistency too, of knowing that the next week there's going to be something else. And like Michael's saying, keeping the engagement up. But I think you do that by honoring your audience and knowing what they're expecting from you. And I really think that once you do that, the rest can solve itself out. It's not about who has the coolest social media to promote it, but it's really all about what you have to say, And so I think a way to do that is by creating community in that space.
One thing that came up when I was researching this, I think if you asked me beforehand, even just a week ago, what's the breakdown for male-female listenership when it comes to podcasts? And anecdotally, I probably would have said maybe 2/3 podcast listeners are men. And it turns out I was way off on that one. It's closer to 46% of women being the podcast market. And I just want to ask, is that an untapped market? I know some of you are certainly leaning in on that front, but fill me in. Is that something that in the last few years we just haven't thought enough about?
What's funny is if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I'd be helping to head up a female-focused podcast network, I would have kind of looked at you strange. But what happened was Lauren and I had been speaking to primarily females for so long. She had built this audience primarily at the Skinny Confidential, and we had collaborated with so long with so many female hosts in the space. And when we looked at the charts, it was so male-dominated, and we thought to ourselves, like, why is this so lopsided considering there's so many hosts we've met, the audience is there. Why is there not a place that caters to help amplify some of these voices and even out those charts a bit? And so, we set out to build it and, set out to do it in a way that really amplified female voices in the space. And looking at the data, I'm a data guy. And I said, like, there is a massive audience here and a huge appetite to promote female voice in the space. I had always worked with women and spoken to women, and it just felt like a no-brainer because, like you said, the data is there. There's a huge demand from female hosts and female listeners. And so I think one thing I'm very proud at Dear Media is, we have created this concentrated space to do that. And I see so many more women jumping in and so many new audience members jumping in. And, now I'm a small part of that, just, kind of pointing us in the right direction. But the amount of different talent that is excited about coming into this medium now and the amount of women that are jumping in, like, I really think like they're the ones that are driving this medium and the future of this medium.
Yeah, 75% of our listenership are women, and partly that's the subject matter, but I think it just shows that if you create content that is female focused and also girl focused, the audience will come and they want it, and there's an appetite for it, and there should be a lot more of it.
Rachel, have you noticed anything on that front too? Have you tried, I know you've been signing a lot of people lately, Tiffany Haddish for one, obviously, she's a celebrity, but just in general, are you targeting more, I guess, female hosts, female-oriented content?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are super focused on making sure we're speaking to every type of person. One of the stats I love the most when I look at our audiences or our members is that we are super balanced. We're super balanced in gender, but we're also balanced in background. And I think that's a thing that we think about at the core of everything we do. Are we representing our customers, and are we looking at the customers like the world is, and making sure that we have content that everyone can connect to? And we certainly measure that. We certainly have intent against that. And we certainly are constantly looking for creators that have really different stories and different spectrums and things to tell. Because when you really get down to it, the art of storytelling, there's just so many things to be heard. One of our recent titles, which I was really emphatic about, we have some new programs we're doing with musical talent. And it's less about, I wrote this song and here's what it's about. It's more of a platform to allow them to tell a story and then punctuate it with music. And we did one with Tom Morello, and been a big Rage of the Machine fan for a long time, but I didn't understand or recognize like what drove him, his background, the original social justice warrior, and seeing that kind of infused into the story. I think that, it just kind of shows that there really are a ton of people that have really amazing things to say, and you really need to kind of focus on making sure you're raising all of those voices.
Sure. And then, Dom, do you just think there was a void to fill there on your end?
Yeah, I think representation is a huge thing. I think that your audience, it kind of transfers over. And speaking to just a lot of, just the Black community, but also Black females in general, I think that it was nice to have my podcast added to the network just to create a new streamlined audience of people that may have never felt represented by a host and now have an opportunity to listen to a voice and create community in the podcast world. But I think it really starts with representation and the people that you have on. But I think as a society, we're doing a good job and we're heading into the right direction with opening up representation for, women, BIPOC, and whatever that looks like,
Yeah, and I'd like to follow up on that because, again, we're always focused on Hollywood, and that's been a key topic over the last few years in our coverage on what's going on in the entertainment industry. Is that, I guess, speaking to the power of podcasts, is that an aspect of it where there's maybe a lower barrier to entry where if you're talented, it doesn't matter what your background is. If you're talented, you're going to reach an audience, and that's just the way it works?
I think yes and no. Just speaking honestly, I think that there are some people that may have a platform or been given a medium to speak on a truth just out of relationship. Maybe it was someone that they knew or they were able to break into that space. For others like myself, I was lucky enough that my platform was amplified by different people and which helped me kind of break into the podcast world as a way to continue the conversation. And I think that when it comes to representation in the industry and what that looks like, it's really important to take the extra step to make sure you're finding diverse people that you can include and not just people in your circle. And so I actually had an episode about this and just breaking into the industry and what this looks like. But I think it's very interesting to realize how much of a polarization there is when it comes to what the industry look like and the lack of diversity in it.
Speaking to the barrier of entry, though, I think, Dom had a very unique perspective, and, we had a relationship previously. She reached out and said, hey, I'm talking about all these things. Would you find this interesting to produce? And, like you said, getting a podcast up and going with the right talent, it's not this, we don't have to go and get this crazy movie production and scene. Like, we were able to get that show up, and she was able to do it very fast. So what I do love about this medium is it is a fast medium for people that are interested in getting into it. I mean, there's absolutely no rhyme or reason that I should have been, that I would be on a mic if you looked at my previous track record and my previous career. But we just started it out of our living room, my wife and I, and, kept going and putting it out there and providing for an audience. And 5 years later, here we are sitting with a bunch of other great women on a network of 45 and growing. And, I think it speaks to people being able to jump in this space and really start a conversation. And, that's why I like it. There's not a lot of gatekeepers like there are in, say, like Hollywood, that say yes or no, who can jump in. Like, anyone with a drive and a little bit of equipment and, a perspective can jump into this and get started. The question is, after that, can you continue to carry a show and grow it? And, hopefully we at Dear Media can help creators do that. But, the barrier of entry, it's wide open.
I also want to touch on a couple things just from the business side for a minute. And Rachel, I think you can really speak to this. We've really seen, I think, a gravitation towards exclusive content over the last year or so in the podcast world. Are we kind of seeing a changing of the zeitgeist, I guess, where we're moving towards more of a walled garden approach? I know you guys have about, I think, 11,000 exclusive shows now. So are we headed more towards that, I think, in the next few years?
Yeah, I think we're always striving to make sure that we are bringing content to the biggest audiences possible. So about a month ago, we opened up a preview, which is a new service from us, which is our first all-you-can-listen service, which includes podcasts, audiobooks, and kind of that stuff that doesn't go in either bucket. And it's a lower price point, and it's kind of a good entry point. Of course, we have, our larger membership model, which also comes with some audiobooks, which is a bit of a different model. But, in India, we have Suno, which is a completely free platform. So we're always kind of testing what's the best for the audience that we're trying to reach, and then what's the best for our creators. Because what our membership model allows is for our creators to create shows without necessarily that hindrance of having to sell it to a brand or having to sell ads against it. And it really allows them to play in the space. And, I think most creators are interested in, one, being properly compensated for their hard work, but more important to that is reaching the right audience. And as long as we're able to bring the right audience to that content, our creators are happy with that, because it's taken a lot of the pressure off in terms of needing to be a big brand hit to make a living with their podcast or their show.
Michael, Jess, I'd love to hear just on your end also, are you seeing any changes, industry shifts that you think are worth mentioning?
I'd say the one thing for us on a monetization front that's been working well is we also license our podcast into different languages. And so we've been able to increase our market and take these stories elsewhere by working with partners in a bunch of different countries in their languages. So in addition to kind of the traditional advertising model and kind of branded audio model, the licensing model has been very, very interesting for us, and across platforms, but especially in multiple languages.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we're seeing a huge boom in podcasting, like I alluded to earlier. When we first got in, people were saying, like, what the hell is a podcast? And now you see Amazon and Spotify and Sirius and Google and every big platform jumping in, which is great. And the talent conversations get more and more abundant. And even on the brand side, early on, like, what's a podcast? Then, hey, should I do a podcast? And now, oh crap, I better get into podcasting. And so, like, it's interesting for me to take a step back and watch as more and more serious medium, serious brands, serious platforms start to pay more and more attention to this audio format. So obviously a good thing for everybody on this call.
Yeah,
sure. And I'll also just jump in with, what are we seeing maybe on the advertising front? That's not something I've focused on too much at TheWrap, but it's something I'm interested in. Are we seeing any shifts there on what advertisers are gravitating towards in terms of shows, even what type of ads they might be placing on the shows?
like I said, I'm seeing what's interesting to me now is to watch a lot of new dollars flood into the space. I think for a while it's been a lot of performance-based audio agencies and marketers that have been engaging here, the typical CPM ads that you hear on radio and other mediums. But I think what a lot of advertisers are realizing is this medium is much more immersive than just a typical, 60-second radio spot. There's a lot you can do here. There's a lot of different integrations. You can talk about exclusive, you can talk about branded shows, you can talk about multi-channel deals that are not just in audio, but going into social and digital and video. And so, my focus here has been to not only, amplify and change some of the creators and voices that are in this space, but to also update the medium in general and to show that there's another way to engage in this space from a brand side. My background is a commerce guy, and when I was setting up campaigns in this space, I was always looking at multi-channel campaigns and working with a creator like Dom to say, hey, how do I integrate a story into the overall brand, not just this one subset? And I think you're going to see a lot more of that start to happen as more of these budgets start to go from podcast performance budgets to really just digital budgets in general. And of course, within that, there's going to be all sorts of different offerings and spectrums, but it's exciting to see new dollars flood into the space. I mean, we still haven't broken $1 billion yet, and I think in terms of revenue for the space, and I think very quickly next year, especially with what's going on in traditional radio and satellite, you'll see this medium move well over that mark.
I think the other thing that we're going to see is more technology, especially for advertising. So instead of measuring how many downloads you have, being able to really measure how many people listen to the ad and can you track their performance after listening to the ad. And so if you think about how digital advertising has evolved over the last 2 decades, we're in an infancy in terms of audio advertising right now, and how we can track it and the technology behind it and what it can power, and therefore what ads work best where. So I'm excited to see the technology piece of audio advertising continue to develop over the next decade.
Oh. So look, we're almost towards the end, and I think I would regret if I didn't at least bring this up. And so it's a tougher question, but over the last week we've seen some employees at Spotify are not thrilled with their decision to bring Joe Rogan on. I know we don't have anyone from Spotify here, but I do want to know, just from an in general standpoint, how would you maybe approach that? Once you sign someone, is it appropriate, or how appropriate is it to maybe say, this content, you can't talk about this subject, or do you try and stay a bit more hands off? How would you approach that, I guess, is what I'm getting at. If anyone feels like
our brand values and what our company stands for is incredibly important to us. From our chairman on down, it's pretty clear who we are and what we're about and what we care about. And maybe it's a little bit of the benefit from being a model such as ours. We are able to really focus on working with creators that kind of adhere to that value. Certainly, we have a huge catalog of content, and we are, just as much servicing that. I think, though, when we focus on what we're creating and what we're planning to put in the space, we make sure that those things kind of illuminate our brand values in a way that is positive for us. So it is definitely something we think about both as a curator of content and a creator of content.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult position to be in when you're starting to decide which content gets seen and which doesn't. I think it goes back to the intention of the company and trying to create content that you feel is compelling for a segment of the audience or your entire audience. I think with your media, we have shows with a lot of outspoken people, and really we leave it to the creators to speak to their audience how they see fit without really getting into the creative process. At one hand, you can have somebody that absolutely shouts from the rooftops and really, really loves a creator, and you can have the exact opposite where someone hates it. So I think it's difficult to play judge and jury when it comes to that, because there's so many different audiences that fall in love with these shows or end up disliking these shows, and ultimately what we're trying to do is just provide all sorts of voices and backgrounds a place to express themselves, and unfortunately you can't always win everybody, and but I do think with this medium, going back to the very beginning, and what I love about it is that you can take a polarizing character and let them talk on a mic for a while and maybe start to have some more understanding around how they came to their conclusions and why they think the way they do. And if anything, and I keep saying this on interviews that I do, is the world needs a little bit more empathy and understanding, and needs to be in a place where maybe we're not so quick to judge and tear each other down, and really be in a place where we can, try to understand, whether we agree or disagree, at least reserving some love in our hearts and minds to say, okay, like, this is another human being. They're trying their best. Like, they came to these views for a reason. And that's what Dear Media tries to be, is just a place of understanding and conversation.
Yeah, I would just want to piggyback off of that. I think when it comes to, a creator and then censorship, I think that's just a war as old as time. And where do you draw the line with, you've crossed it, you've gone too far, and at the same time allowing people to speak their truth? And I think, it's a couple of things. It's a little bit of a formula of knowing that at some point, it can't cause too much harm, because, it's people, and at the same time, people are complicated, and everyone's truth is different and looks different. And I think what Michael's saying is so important, is that you have to create space, but make it a safe space, a pliable space, a place where people aren't being attacked and harmed, but a space for genuine conversation. If an opinion, is controversial, which we all know it takes up media space today, it's so important to make sure that we're being respectful as well. And I think that's where the harm comes, is when we lose respect and accountability and kindness when we're entering into these spaces. And I think that's where the harm and the conversation of censorship starts to come up.
And then, so we only have a few more minutes to go. And I'd just like to maybe go around, and starting with Jess, I want to get everyone's, opinion on maybe where we're going to be looking at, or what we're going to be looking at from the podcast industry 3 to 5 years from now. It's kind of a staple of these panels anyway. We like to get predictions in. So just where do you see we're headed in the next couple of years here?
Yeah, I think there's going to be more. I think there's going to be more shows, more diverse voices, more content forms and lengths and types and selection for users. I think there's going to be a lot more users and a lot more people listening as we increase the volume and diversity of content. And I also think that, as I mentioned before, advertising and technology is going to also progress over the next 3 to 5 years. How we monetize, how we think about performance, and how we tailor and personalize is going to go forward. And at some point, we'll also have more immersive, choose your own adventure type interactions with podcasts, and you'll be able to have more audience participation and or say over your own journey. So that's the future.
Yep, I agree, and echo everything she just said. And I would also say that I do think, to a degree, that this medium will start to replace a lot of mainstream media channels. I think long are gone soon the days of having arguments on television with quick 5-minute sound bites without the room to answer and start to understand. I think everybody, as a people, they want a little bit more information, and they want to get to a place where they can hear those conversations and trust those conversations. And what I really love about this is, like, there are not just a few selective gatekeepers that allow people to share their voice. Like, people can jump in and start sharing their opinions, and I think it's going to enlighten and open the eyes of society to say, oh, okay, we can understand each other a little better. So outside of obviously more dollars, more hosts, more diversity, more talent coming in, and more obviously tech mediums and platforms jumping in, like, I do think this is going to be one of the most impactful ways that we as people start to receive information and understand it.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think that there's just going to be a lot of unheard and voices that are maybe not being heard right now that'll just kind of flourish in this space. And like Michael's saying, there isn't gatekeeping for podcasting. Like anyone can start it, anyone can join. And so I think as the medium continues to grow, so will the voices that are being heard.
Yeah, and I'll agree with all of that and just add options. I think you'll start to see a lot more options for people entering the space and creating in the space and figuring out what direction they want to go. More and more will be available to them.
Well, that does it for us. I want to say thank you to Rachel, Dom, Jess, and Michael for joining us. In about 15 minutes, we're going to have the Social Dilemma writer and director, Jeff Orlowski, again. So stick around for that. But other than that, thanks for joining us and tuning in.
Thank you.